The US should immediately halt this practice of separating families and stop criminalizing what should at most be an administrative offense, that of irregular entry and stay in the US.
That was a spokeswoman for the United Nations Office for Human Rights on Tuesday. That agency is condemning the practice of separating migrant children from their parents if they entered the country illegally. The United Nations says such a practice is illegal. It was responding to reports U.S. officials have separated more than 700 children from their parents, a practice drawing widespread criticism right now. On Tuesday, President Trump weighed in, blaming Democrats for the policy. He tweeted, quote, "Separating families at the border is the fault of bad legislation passed by the Democrats." For more on this, let's bring in Caitlin Dickerson. She's a national immigration reporter for the New York Times. And Caitlin, I want to begin with the president's tweet. Let's just fact check here. Is this legislation, this policy of separating families, coming into the country?
No, this is not a policy that was enacted by the Democrats. So the tweet was in essence inaccurate, but to break it down a little bit, the president is referring to criminal code that has for a long time allowed for people who come into the United States without permission to be prosecuted criminally. But in the past and under the Obama administration, it almost never happened. So now that people are being prosecuted criminally when they enter the country, they have to be taken from their children because children can't go into criminal custody. So that's the difference that's happening now. It's that the Trump administration is enforcing laws that have been on the books for many years, but that in past administrations just weren't utilized. So
same rules really on the books, just a different level of enforcement. The Trump administration here is saying they have a zero tolerance policy, that is their position. How has that increased the numbers of children now in U.S. custody?
Right. So this zero tolerance policy is another way of describing the family separation policy. And we don't know exactly why it's framed the way that it is, but we know that since last year, the Trump administration was weighing this option of separating by force families, parents and children from one another as a way to discourage people from coming to the United States, because who wants to come here if they know their parents are going to be taken away? And so they came up with this way of doing it without calling it a family separation policy. It's called zero tolerance, which means, as I said, everybody who crosses the border is now prosecuted. But what does that mean? It means that everyone is then separated from their kids.
And you know that they were wavering on the messaging here, partly because current Chief of Staff John Kelly, the language he used in initially describing the policy, he eventually walked back.
He did walk back, and then when you've seen Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, talk more recently about zero tolerance, for example, it's always describing, people who are human trafficking, people who are smuggling, not using the language of parents and children. The reality is that you're dealing with both. There are human traffickers and smugglers who cross the border, but what the public is concerned about is the parents and kids who are just trying to seek safety.
When you speak about Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who President Trump has publicly criticized because of the Russia probe, he, in an interview earlier this week, was speaking to Hugh Hewitt, a conservative journalist, and Hugh was pressing him on the fact that why are you separating families? Mm-hmm. He as a conservative doesn't like it, and Jeff Sessions kept coming back to these are the laws and we want to get the message out. It seems as though they do want this to be a deterrent, but what are some of the pitfalls in that? Because I understand some kids have gone missing.
It's true. I mean, it's a very challenging thing for all administrations, really, how to control the number of people crossing the border. And the Obama administration tried many different things, and quite frankly, none of them worked. So this is a much more extreme measure, and the goal here is to try to, as you said, to keep people from crossing the border. But lots of things can go wrong. The children are going into custody of a separate federal agency, the Health and Human Services Department, while the parents are being held by the Department of Homeland Security. And those two agencies don't always talk to each other very well. And so that's why you're seeing, for example, in some cases, DHS not knowing where the kids are or vice versa.
Do you have any updated information on that as they try and track down children who they actually cannot locate, or at least one department cannot locate?
So we should try to clarify that there's this number, this 1,400 kids that many people have talked about, and this is a separate issue. These are kids who came in by themselves, who were placed in homes with sponsors, with adults in the United States, and then the U.S. government, when they tried to follow up with the sponsors to find the kids, couldn't get a hold of them. It's really a separate idea, but what we're talking about here is parents and children who cross the border together and then get separated from one another. Anecdotally, I hear from immigration lawyers that, sometimes a parent parent might be deported while the child is still here in the United States, or that they're in different states from one another. But the reality is that most of these people don't have immigration lawyers, so we're not going to know what's happening to them.
Speaks to the complexity of the issue as well. It's not just one type of person crossing into the country illegally. There are a myriad of reasons. I understand that there are dozens of migrants seeking asylum camping out on a bridge in Mexico. What's the status of their processing, if you have an update for us on that?
Those specific migrants, I don't. I can tell you in general that for a year now we've heard reports of people who've come to United States points of entries to try to seek asylum and have been turned away. It's a violation of international law and also domestic law. But what we've seen is just Border Patrol officers being totally inundated and overwhelmed with asylum seekers. And as you said, a different level of enforcement, a different level of scrutiny under this administration than we've seen in the past. So by and large, when you see people sort of piling up along the border, it's because they're running into issues where in the past they would have been able to come and say, you know, I'm seeking safety, I need protection in the United States. In the past they would have been let in, and in some cases now they're not.
Well, I know you'll continue to follow the twists and turns of this. You're doing some incredible work. Caitlin Dickerson, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.